Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for us to talk about something that a lot of people have been disappointed with lately, and that is the new Archon quest in Genshin Impact version 5.7, and we've got none other than Mr. Glaive Kyo himself here to talk about it. And when it comes to Genshin Impact and when it comes to Wuthering Waves, I feel like Glaive Kyo sits in a very unique department because I think he's one of the only people that plays Wuthering Waves and is also actively keeping up with the Genshin story. Because at this point, most people have given up on it, those with, any shred of their sanity remaining, but we all know that Glaive is clinically insane. So with that, why don't we go ahead and see what his thoughts are on the matter as a longtime Hoyo player, and give our own take as somebody that's not willing to, go through this sort of mental torture themselves.
It has been a few weeks since the 5.7 livestream, and I've had some time to really sit with and process the latest Archon quest.
Can I get 5 big booms?
Boom! 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 Boom!
And I have to admit, after watching that stream, I was genuinely optimistic. I was actually excited to jump back into Tavat for this one. There was a lot of positive sentiment coming out of the 5.6 story, a feeling that the narrative was finding a really solid stride, so naturally, the expectations was that 5.7 would continue that upward trend. All of the promotional material seemed to confirm that as well.
I heard a lot of people were very excited for Genshin 5.6, right? I think it was like finally a return to Natlan, not a return from Natlan. It was a return from Natlan, yeah, because they spent so much time in the most dogshit region in Genshin Impact history. People were just really looking forward to and liked 5.6 because it was like the first patch in a while that they weren't entirely focused on fucking Natlan. No, the filler quest with Mizuki and the fucking hot springs, that one doesn't count. They also had Albedo, I think, featured in the main story for the first time ever, so a lot of reasons for that.
We're promised the return of the Traveler sibling, and of course, the return of Dainsleif. There is a sort of a unwritten rule among the longtime players. When Dainsleif shows up, the story is about to get serious. His presence has always been a reliable indicator that we are about to move past the more self-contained regional conflicts and touch upon the central, foundational mysteries of the game.
Basically, the plot only progresses when Dainsleif shows up. Everything outside of Dainsleif showing up is effectively, in the story of Genshin Impact, actually filler. People talk about how Genshin has, like, filler patches. Honestly, the story of Genshin, all the time you spend in each region, like, solving the problems, that's the real filler. Yeah, all the stuff you did in Mondstadt, Inazuma, Sumeru, Fontaine, that was actually the filler. Half the shit could just not happen, and then you'd be able to just progress the story just fine, as long as Dainsleif shows up somewhere.
Is a harbinger of consequence, or something like that. So I went into the story quest with high, but I think reasonable expectations. And the story we received was like, complicated. It is a quest that needs to be examined from multiple angles to really understand it. So
ooh, we got Lore Glaive, huh? We got Lore Kyo up in the house. Okay.
before we get into the execution, the pacing, the dialogue, the things that make up the player's experience, it is important to first establish what the story quest was trying to be. To be fair to the writers of the story quest, A Space and Time for You is on paper one of the boldest story ideas Genshin has ever told. The way that the story starts is simple, but in a clever way. A key, identical to the Traveler's own.
Isn't that Firefly's transformation thing? Did they just reuse assets from Honkai Star Rail? That's the little thing that Firefly uses to turn into the robot, right?
It's found in a cave. It is a real physical link that suggests a reunion with the sibling is finally, truly within reach. But this personal goal quickly spirals into something far more complicated. We are introduced to a character, Gareth, who isn't just another quest giver, not just another NPC, an NPC with a new face by the way, but is literally a person out of her own time, like a living piece of the past, showing up in the present. Her existence creates a time loop paradox, where an event seems to cause itself, and this becomes the main engine for both the plot and the deeper ideas. All of this builds up to one of the biggest reveals about the lore in the game's history, the Abyss Order's ultimate plan.
After 5 years, we finally are gonna know what their plan is? Hell yeah, brother!
Learn their goal isn't simple destruction, but a kind of universal rewriting. It is an attempt to bring the dead nation of Kandria back to life, not with normal magic, but using memory and fate themselves as the building blocks through a device they call the Loom of Fate. This isn't just another regional crisis. The story is tackling some genuinely big, complicated ideas, like cause and effect, whether history can actually be changed, and what really makes a name destination? Is it the physical land, or is it the shared memories of its people? It is ambitious and it deserves to be recognized for that. And settling the mood for this whole experience, as always, is the music. It is almost a given at this point, but it's worth repeating.
Wait, so it sounds like he's just glazing the entire thing right now. But is he only talking about the good parts, and is this section of the video only going to be about 45 more seconds?
I think the score is exceptional. It does a lot of the emotional work for the story, providing the sense of tragedy, wonder, and serious weight that the gameplay itself sometimes fails to deliver. The music understands the assignment perfectly. It is why this conversation is so complicated, because when you ignore how the story was presented, the animations, the pacing, the dialogue, and you just look at the blueprint of this story, it is genuinely interesting. The idea of your long-lost sibling creating a time loop to rewrite history out of a sense of guilt and duty.
Wait, so the sibling creates a time loop to rewrite history. Isn't that just the story of... I'm sorry, I was about to say, it almost seems like Genshin retconned the story to make it seem like waves. Wasn't that one of, like, the early, like, 1.0 Wuthering Waves theories? Is that, like, the world is on, like, some sort of, like, repeated loop, and that's why Rover's been going through so many different resets? Like, a big lament always ends up happening and destroys the world, so they kind of, like, reset it over and over? Oh, boy. Well, I guess, hey, maybe that means that the story has been rewritten a lot with Genshin Impact, because that doesn't seem like what they were originally trying to do.
That is a fantastic idea that really makes you think. On paper, it should have been one of Genshin's finest moments, which of course brings us to the experience of actually playing it, because a blueprint is not the final structure, and the central question we have to ask is, how was this grand idea translated into an interactive experience? This right here is where the fracture begins. The quest begins, as many of them do, with a significant period of what the community has affectionately, or perhaps not affectionately, termed the Yap Fest. This isn't just a slow start, it is a structural choice. You are sent on a chain of conversations, a breadcrumb trail where every breadcrumb leads to another NPC who also happens to know nothing. Hey man, did you see anything suspicious? No. Do you have any information about the Abyss Order? Also no. And then you go to another NPC. Did you see anything suspicious? No. The player is forced to invest their full attention for hours at a time, but the narrative return on that investment is close to zero for a significant portion of the runtime. The build-up isn't just slow, it is static. And it is important to understand that this isn't a bug. Unfortunately, it is a feature. It is a part of a design philosophy that seems to rely on a powerful psychological principle: recency bias. Have you heard of that before? The model...
I think it's sunk cost, to be honest. Guys, think about it this way. How many hours of story and how many lines of dialogue would it take you to get to here in the story? Maybe more than 100. Right? So at this point, Hoyoverse has to recognize that anyone that's actually here has spent maybe 100 hours, a few weeks of story to get to here. And so at this point, they're kind of just like, fuck it. Who cares how we tell it? If they're playing it, they're already invested at this point. If they're even going ahead and experiencing what's in this patch, who cares how low the quality of the story actually is? The fact that they've made it this far means that they're gonna play this shit anyways. That's what it kind of seems like, right? You're too invested. There's too much sunk cost.
Is consistent across multiple Archon quests, or any other quest, to be honest. You have hours of this slow burn investigation, this padded dialogue, which then culminates in a short, explosive 15 to 20 minutes burst of spectacle and genuine plot advancement right at the very end. The human mind naturally places more weight on recent and emotionally intense events. That final climactic twist, the revelation of the Luma fate, the confrontation with the sibling, that is what gets screen capped.
So he's saying basically it's just an absolutely delayed payoff for what occurs. The actual payoff itself is okay or like not bad, but the path leading up to it is the worst edging session in gacha gaming.
Gets posted into social media. What dominates the YouTube thumbnails? It becomes the memory of the quest. And in becoming the primary memory, it effectively overwrites the hours of frustration that preceded it. It is a remarkably effective strategy for managing community conversation and generating hype. But it doesn't change the reality of the experience itself. It creates a fundamental disconnect between what the quest was to play, moment to moment, and what it remembered as being. And it is within that disconnect between the tedious journey and the spectacular spectacular destination that we find most of the quest's significant flaws. So the foundation of the experience is often slow and dialogue heavy, but the problems run deeper than just pacing. It is an issue of presentation, a persistent, almost dogmatic refusal to leverage the game's own visual medium. It is one of the oldest rules in storytelling. Show.
Nah, man. Hoyoverse is a tell don't show company, okay? Why would we go ahead and spend our billions of dollars in budget on animations when we could just write more stuff? Do you know how cost effective it is just to write stuff? Come on, Glaive. You gotta know how businesses work, buddy. If the customers are gonna buy that shit anyways, if they've already invested 200 hours to get into the story at this point, who the fuck cares about how actually high quality it is? Just put in like one cutscene or two that don't look like dog shit, and that'll be enough.
Oh, don't tell. And this quest, like many before it, if not every one of it, violates that rule with a quiet, consistent dedication. It is the most egregious case. The most egregious case, of course, is Dainsleif. We are told after the fact that he single-handedly collapsed the Abyss Order's front line, which is a monumental feat. It should be a defining moment that recontextualizes our understanding of his power. And how is it presented? An NPC walks up to us and delivers it like a field report. Their front lines have lost. We don't see a single moment of the battle. The most impactful character action in the entire first half of the quest is reduced to a single line of dialogue, a second-hand account. The player is denied the spectacle, and Dainsleif is denied a defining cinematic. And
I know the perfect example to bring up over here. Y'all ready for this? Y'all remember this cutscene? I know y'all remember this one.
How rude. This is not how we greet people here. Allow me to demonstrate the proper etiquette.
Imagine if instead of seeing this cutscene, if instead of seeing this, all we got was a message from Chainly on the terminal saying, "Don't worry, I took care of the Fraxidus. Don't worry, I took care of the Fraxidus. They're gone now. You guys can go meet Jue." Or we don't even see this, right? We just have a cutscene after we get on the elevator, and then Jinsei tells us, "Don't worry, Chainly took care of the Fraxidus." And you don't get to see this. Because guess what? It would have been a lot cheaper. It would have been a lot more affordable, guys, right? If Kuro Games just decided, hey, yeah, just skip this fucking shit entirely. We don't have the resources to model all this shit out. We'll just say that Chainly took him out off screen.
there is another time that you could have animated Dainsleif fighting the Abyss Lecter, or whatever you call that creature is. What did you show, Hoyoverse? You showed a vibrating rock? You off-screened the fight? What? This philosophy of telling extends all the way down to the most basic character interaction, where the animations actively undermines the script. There is a moment early on where Yansan is meant to give Paimon a threatening look, implying that she should join a fighting competition. The script is clearly written for a visual gag, but the animation doesn't deliver. Yansan's face remains static, lifeless. So what happens? Paimon has to narrate the visual gag out loud for the audience. Oh no, don't look at Paimon like that. Look at you like what? The game is literally telling you what you're supposed to be seeing, because it has failed to show you. It feels less like a performance and more like the developers are just flipping a switch on a character model. Oh yeah, this dialogue, toggle smile, toggle sad, toggle cross hands one. A jarring lack of nuance that—
Hey, at least it's, hey, HSR, at least they're consistent, brother. Right? Y'all remember this post from HSR, right? Toggle anger. It looks so bad. Like, and that's the thing. The poses look bad. Yeah, that one from HSR, where it's like, bro, it looks like shit. It looks like it looks like it's from a PS2 game. And they do it in almost every single quest. You'll see it.
becomes painfully obvious during this long dialogue-heavy scenes. And this is what the community means when they criticize—
What about the guy with no nose? Oh yeah, NPCs don't have noses in HSR either. I can't.
the game's over-reliance on a visual novel style of presentation. The expectation for a game of this scale and with this level of financial success is a dynamic cinematic experience. The reality, too often, is static characters delivering text boxes. It creates this strange paradox where a multi-billion-dollar project frequently presents its core narrative with the apparent budget constraints of a small indie studio.
Well, because it would take time to readjust the rigging so that their facial bones on the models have more than 2 fucking joints.
Community joke about
how's Dwayne gonna afford his next fucking yacht if we end up making updates like that, Glaive? Can't you think about other people for once, bucko?
Hoyoverse is
have some fucking empathy.
Acting like they're an indie company that makes no money. It's not just a meme now. It is pointed criticism, born from the frustrations of seeing so much potential left on the table year after year. But even the best presentation in the world can't save a script that works against itself. And that brings us to the writing, the words on a page. This is where the failure of immersion becomes even more pronounced.
Oh boy.
Let's start with the problem of the dialogue bloat. The script in these story quests often feels less like a natural conversation and more like it was written to meet a minimum word count for an essay. This feeling is amplified when the text is delivered by, for the lack of better term, NPC number 249, a generic character model with a familiar, often used voice, delivering lines that serve little purpose other than to take up space on the screen. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the entire stalemate section of the quest. It is a significant portion of the runtime dedicated to telling us that, essentially, nothing is happening. The section exists almost exclusively to give screen time to new characters like Setlali and Mavuika, who, by the end of the story, have contributed a jarring almost nothing to the actual resolution of the plot. It is padding, and it respects the player's time so little that it becomes actively frustrating.
Doesn't this almost serve the purpose, right, of like including these characters in the quest because you want like the fans of these characters to feel like more engaged because the character that they like is finally here and is finally showing up? Doesn't this also feel like they're just kind of bastardizing the characterization of the characters as well by making them appear to be the biggest fucking time wasters in gacha gaming, talking about a whole lot of nothing, and in a lot of ways would get people pissed off at how needlessly wordy the characters are. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my take. But I feel like the image of characters that are being overused and talking for no fucking reason would go down after something like this.
It is filler that stands between the player and the actual story they came for. And if you're gonna defend the Setlali part, what did she do actually? Like, she gave you like, oh, I had a dream the other day. Is that it? Like, that's gonna be your argument? Oh god, don't start. Beyond just being bloated, however, the writing often feels mechanical. Characters don't act based on believable human emotion. They act in ways that are convenient for moving the plot from point A to point B. The most jarring example of this is this introduction. We meet her as she is fleeing for her life from invisible monsters. A genuinely terrifying concept. Yet, moments after we save her, literally like a minute later, the trauma is completely forgotten.
Dude. Genshin does this so often with their cutscenes, where it's like just the unit, something happening. I think, wasn't there a scene where it's like Mavuika on her motorcycle, and then like Jalonen is like reflecting on it? And like Mavuika is just spinning around in on her motorcycle in like the mindscape that we have over here. It's like, bro, this actually looks like lower budget than like fan animations. They're so lazy that they can't even like find a way to render a background properly.
Genuinely terrifying concept. Yet, moments after we save her, literally like a minute later, the trauma is completely forgotten. She immediately shifts into a well-worn trope of a nervous, starstruck girl confessing a strange and sudden affection for the traveler. It is so unnatural that even Paimon, the embodiment of cringe herself, seems weirded out by it. Her character is written this way because the plot needs her to establish an instant, intense connection to the traveler to make the time loop mechanics function. The character's emotional reality is sacrificed for the sake of the plot, and this mechanical feel permeates other interactions. There is the unearned, out-of-the-blue glazing of the traveler from the characters they have just met. There is the nervous anime boy NPC who delivers nearly 15 minutes of dialogue slop that could have been completely removed. There is the token
Oh, but I thought Wuthering Waves was the game with overt amounts of glazing. Oh, but Genshin Impact in a 1 to 2 hour quest introducing several NPCs. That's just not really a thing.
Jealousy from Setlali, which feels more like a checklist item than a character trait, which is, in my opinion, pretty cute. But it's still, come on. It is a collection of tired tropes that feels less like organic storytelling and more like the writers are pressing.
Twitter must be in shambles. Well, this is the thing. Twitter's never going to talk about this. Glay's probably going to be the only person that talks about this, right? Because then this would be hoyo shills actually being genuine about their critiques. Because at the end of the day, right, the only critique that I end up seeing 90% of the time about Wuthering Waves is, oh my gosh, every character's in love with Rover. Oh my gosh, it's such bad storytelling. And then if it turned out that Genshin was doing the same exact thing, which it literally is, right? But probably just worse. Actually worse. It is worse. They're doing this, they're trying to do the same thing as Wuwa, but just they do it worse. Of course they're never going to talk about it. Of course they're never going to call it out because, well, that wouldn't be hypocritical. And of course, hoyo shills are 99% the most hypocritical freaks in the space when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Every known button for maximum awkwardness. When the writing feels this artificial, it pulls you out of the game completely. It reminds you that you're playing a game with systems and objectives, not experiencing a living, breathing world. And when the writing constantly reminds you that you're playing a game, a set of systems and objectives, it highlights the biggest and most persistent questions of all. A question that extends far beyond this one quest and into the very structure of Genshin's narrative philosophy. If our actions within the story don't seem to matter to the world around us, then what really was the point? It brings us to a critique voiced by many creators and longtime players who have followed this game for years.
Maybe there just was no point the entire time. Guys, you have to realize here, they've been able to drag this story out for 5 years. What has fundamentally changed in the scope of the story since Mondstadt to currently? At this point, you should be impressed with the Genshin story writers for being able to actually progress the plot so little in such a long span of time. At this point, this level of stalling, nuclear fucking stalling by the hoyo writers should be studied. It honestly seems like they just launched this game and like the overarching plot, they actually had only written like 2 hours of it, but they managed to extend it out 5 years. You could probably watch a regular 3-hour movie that would tell you more about the Genshin story than what they've been able to give us through the Archon quests. People are just lapping it up. People are saying it's like good at some points. It's kind of impressive.
A growing fatigue from being, as one put it, tired of not seeing any results. The game consistently tells stories with universe-altering stakes, but the universe itself remains stubbornly, almost defiantly, unaltered. This quest in particular is perhaps the most extreme example we have ever seen. The story concludes with the creation of the Atlas of the New World, a portable metaphysical blueprint for an entire lost nation. In terms of lore, this is a cataclysmic event. It is the culmination of the Abyss Order's centuries-long goal. It should change everything. It should change something. And yet, the moment the final dialogue box closes and you are returned to the open world, what actually changes for you, the player? Nothing. The world is exactly as it was before. This epic achievement, the result of all your effort throughout the quest, is effectively stored away in a narrative filing cabinet. It has no tangible impact on your ongoing journey, no visible footprint on the world you are supposed to be saving. And this raises a fundamental philosophical question about the game's entire approach to narrative design, one that has sparked endless debates within the community. On one side, there is an argument that the consequences are there, but they aren't meant to be obvious. They exist in the lore of a new weapon description.
I've always found the people that are like heavily theory crafting about the descriptions of artifacts and like how much they mean to the overall story. Honestly, I don't even think these are canon, bro. I think they just they just asked some AI to write some random shit about the game. They just copy paste it onto here. I don't think any of this shit ever gets like actively referenced. It never actually means anything. It's like the flavor text on a Hearthstone card.
A line in an artifact set, or in a very specific world quest that might appear a year down the line. In this view, it is the player's responsibility to do the homework, to be an archaeologist of the story and piece together the impact themselves. The other side argues that this is an abdication of storytelling responsibility, that a main story quest, the central pillar of the narrative, should be a self-contained experience with visible, meaningful consequences, that a player shouldn't have to read an item description to understand the impact of saving, or in this case, recreating a nation. But when the consequences of your actions are rendered entirely invisible in the world you inhabit, it makes the stakes feel hollow. It creates a story that exists in a vacuum, completely disconnected from the game you actually play.
I think that's fair. For people to find any level of enjoyment in the Genshin story and not just feel like shit is missing or just feel like there's like so many gaps that need to be filled, you need to watch like fucking lore videos, bro. One of the reasons why I feel like lore videos aren't necessarily as big in Wuthering Waves is because you actually know what's going on from what's in the story. Yeah, I'm pretty sure anyone that played the first part of the Wuthering Waves 2.4 Septimonte quest has a pretty clear idea of what's going on, why it's happening, what needs to be fixed, and doesn't necessarily have too many questions about the significance of certain things. Yes, we know all about what the Dark Tide is. We know what the Dark Tide does, right? We know that there's a carrier of the Dark Tide, and, you know, there needs to be, like, some sort of dynamic where either she disappears or, you know, we find out what the carrier problem is. Like, you know why you're there. You know the significance of failing your mission. It's just all the questions that you could possibly have are either easily answered from, like, you know, just recollecting what happens in the story, or there's a reason why you don't have the answers yet. It's contained, things make sense, versus like, okay, now I'm over here in Genshin Impact, and you're telling me that unless I'm gonna go ahead and read more wordy dialogue after going through the most dialogue-bloated story ever, I'm gonna have to do this additional research to even, like, have a frank clue about what's going on. Jesus Christ, man. You would imagine for an audience like this, they'd want stuff that's more, like, understandable at a surface level. But that's why I think it's just a lot of it is written in after the fact.
Actions feel less like world-changing events and more like fleeting, meaningless gestures. If a story has no tangible echo in its world, did it ever truly make a sound? And that question of whether a story truly makes a sound if it has no echo, it brings us to the heart of the matter. Ultimately, the 5.7 Archon quest is the perfect encapsulation of a story at war with itself. On one side, you have this incredible narrative ambition, a desire to tell complex, mature stories about causality, fate, and memory. And on the other side, you have an outdated, passive execution that constantly undermines that ambition. The great idea is always fighting against the slow pacing, the lifeless presentation, the mechanical writing, and a narrative structure that carefully isolates its biggest, most world-changing moments from a game you actually play. And to be fair, there are improvements here. The camera work in this quest is more dynamic than in older ones, if I remember correctly. The concepts that it tackles are becoming more mature, but these feel like small incremental upgrades applied to a foundation that retains the same core problems it has had for years. It is like applying a new coat of paint to a house with a cracked foundation. It looks
And I think a big part of it is them trying to balance actual stuff happening in like this overarching story with the goofy ass stuff that's been going on in pretty much every single like nation quest. Fontaine seems like one of the only quests that really seemed like a little bit more grounded, a little bit more rooted, and that's why people liked it so much. And then Natlan is reduced to My Little Pony, right? Friendship is magic, going around uniting the power of whatever, and then like, you know, ooh, we battled the abyss and drove them back. Good job, guys. It seems like they have different writers trying to progress the story in different ways. It seems like the writing teams are not conjoined when they should be. They're all working off of like different rough drafts and scripts. That's why so many people were so excited after Fontaine, and that's why so many people were so disappointed after Natlan. Just the lowest, worst quality storytelling that the game has probably ever had, and recovering from that is going to be so fucking rough.
It's a little better from a distance, but the structural issues remained untouched. It is why putting a rating on the quest like this feels so irrelevant. A 9.79 out of 10 minus 4 doesn't capture the specific nature of the frustration. The real issue here isn't that the quest is simply bad. The issue is the profound feeling of massive, squandered potential. It is the disappointment of being shown a glimpse of what could be an all-time great narrative, only to have it delivered through a flawed and tedious experience. experience. Genshin storytelling is clearly evolving, but this quest forces us to ask if the current model is truly sustainable. Does a powerful ending really justify a flawed and frustrating journey? And how long can ambitious ideas carry an experience before the execution itself requires a fundamental, not just incremental change? Let me know your thoughts below. But that is all from me, Glaive Kyo, and I will see you in the next one.
Awesome video by Glaive breaking it down. I think at the end of the day, right, a lot of the wait, Aether is shorter than Skirk. That's crazy. So yeah, it's just at the end of the day, I feel like the entire breakdown of the issues that we're seeing over here is just the sheer fact that Hoyoverse is trying to tell a more mature story. They are actually trying to tell what is happening in the overarching lore, but the issues with actually absorbing the story, the issues with actually, you know, comprehending what the impacts are, and the relative meaninglessness of what actually occurs in reflection seems to be the biggest issues. And the thing is that it takes so long for any player to get to this point, right? To get to this quest. And when you have to shovel through the mountains of garbage, right, that Natlan is effectively known for, and then Natlan is still heavily featured in this quest, it's just kind of like, man, I think people are just expecting a callback to actual better storytelling that the game might have had before. But it's also just like, they won't abandon the things that have been heavily critiqued already, that other games are actively doing better and serving as like models for. Because really, all you need to do is just take the animations, right? Take the fluidity, take the condensed dialogue that doesn't get too needlessly wordy and doesn't make it shit and, you know, and makes a lot of sense while not taking up a lot of screen time. Have more things happen in the quest. Because I feel like when Wuthering Waves 2.4, in that 2-hour, 2-part quest, in the first part of it, right? The first 2 hours, more happens in that quest than the first 3 hours of a Genshin Impact story. And it's insane how much more fulfilling that experience feels like. Maybe it's a budget thing. Maybe it's an effort thing. Who knows? Maybe we'll just have to see what happens in fucking Nod Cry. But yeah, let me know what you all think. Peace.